There's a phrase that I love. The fifth gospel. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, those are the real gospels. But the fifth gospel, that's what people call the Holy Land. Think of it like this. Imagine the most extraordinary book you've ever read, and then imagine someone turned it into a film, shot entirely on location. When you go to the Holy Land, you're not just reading the story anymore. You are in it. You're standing on the actual set. And here's the thing that gets me every time. So many of these places haven't really changed. The terrain around the Sea of Galilee looks more or less the same as it did 2,000 years ago. The Golan Heights are still there. The hills, the rocks, the shoreline. Jesus looked at what you're looking at. There's a Jesuit priest, Father James Martin, who wrote a beautiful book called Jesus, a Pilgrimage. He describes arriving at a place called Tabgha, on the shore of the Sea of Galilee. He was traveling alone, no group, so he had time to just sit and reflect. He looked around at the landscape, and he saw rocks, thorny bushes, patches of fertile soil, and it hit him. This is the parable of the sower. Jesus wasn't speaking in abstract metaphors. He was pointing at what his audience could literally see in front of them. He was preaching their world back to them. That's what the Holy Land does. It makes the Gospels three-dimensional. So today and next week, I want to take you to a few of those places. The places where you can actually say, He was here. And at this point, I want to give credit to my father Gunther Sommacher, who wrote a book called The Holy Land Trek, and who has given lectures on the things I'm going to be talking about today. You can find a link to the book down below. Let's start at the beginning, Bethlehem. Bethlehem is still called Bethlehem, the house of bread. It's now a city in the West Bank, in Palestine. Just a quick note before we continue. When people talk about a pilgrimage to the Holy Land, they often say a trip to Israel. But the full picture is Israel and Palestine. It's all the Holy Land. Now, some scholars over the years have asked, how can we be sure Jesus was actually born in Bethlehem? It's a fair question. Some say he was born in Nazareth, but that is to cast doubt on Matthew and Luke. Bottom line is that over 2,000 years, there was never a tradition of Jesus being born in Nazareth. The only tradition ever is that Jesus was born in Bethlehem, and we likely know the spot of his birth. Think of it this way. If someone extraordinary was born 30 years ago in your small town, would people remember? Of course they would. They'd be pointing at that house. They'd be telling their grandchildren. And people in the ancient world had extraordinary memories. They didn't have books for everything, or libraries, and they didn't have Google or ChatGPT. So they memorized everything. The scriptures, the genealogies, the history of their people. It lived in their heads. These were not people who forgot where significant things had happened. So when early followers of Jesus came to Bethlehem, the locals could show them where Mary, wife of Joseph, gave birth to Jesus. And here's something fascinating. The Romans actually helped preserve the memory of Jesus' birthplace. Around 130 AD, the Emperor Hadrian was rebuilding Jerusalem and various sites across Palestine. And in Bethlehem, the Romans built a pagan temple right over the spot that local Christians were already venerating as the place of Jesus' birth. The Romans thought they were killing the memory of Jesus, but what it actually did was to mark the spot for the next 200 years, until Christianity was legalized by Constantine in the year 313. Suddenly, churches could be built, and one of the very first was the Church of the Nativity, built right over that same spot. The church has been rebuilt since. Most of what stands today is from the 6th century. But the location has been continuously remembered, signposted, and venerated for 2,000 years. When you go there today, you descend into the grotto beneath the altar. There's a silver star set into the floor. You kneel down, reach through, and touch the ground. That is where it all began. That's where Jesus was born. In the next few videos, I'll even tell you why our image of a stable in the middle of nowhere is actually wrong. So stick around. Let's move to where Jesus grew up, Nazareth. Now, there are a couple of excavations that are plausible as sites of the Holy Family's home, but we can't say that any of them definitely are the true place. But here's one thing in Nazareth where people can say with absolute, total, 100% certainty that Jesus was there, and Mary too. It's a well. Nazareth had one source of water, one well, and this was in continuous use for centuries, and the well house is standing in Nazareth to this day. When Mary went to fetch water, which she did every day, she went to that well. When she brought little Jesus with her, he was there too. The well was a social gathering point. There's actually an Orthodox church nearby called St. Gabriel's, and they'll let you draw water from the well, the same source Our Lady and Jesus drank from. I know that might sound like a small thing, but when you're standing there, pulling up that water, there's something that happens. Some kind of closeness that's hard to describe. That's the power of pilgrimage. Most of Jesus' public ministry happened around the Sea of Galilee. And when I say around the Sea of Galilee, I mean a surprisingly small area. Smaller than the northern suburbs of a mid-sized city, and yet so much happened there. The Sea of Galilee hasn't changed dramatically. There are no skyscrapers on the shoreline. The Golan Heights still rise in the distance. When you stand there, you're essentially looking at what Jesus looked at. The fishing town of Capernaum was Jesus' base during his ministry. The scriptures tell us he preached in a synagogue there, healed people, and performed miracles. For centuries, the city was completely buried, covered by sand after an earthquake, forgotten. Then, in the 19th century, people started finding it again. In the 1970s, two Franciscan priests, Father Virgilio Corbo and Father Stanislao Lofreda, began a serious excavation, and what they found was remarkable. First, the synagogue. There's a 4th century synagogue that still stands at Capernaum today. It's an impressive structure. But when they looked at what it was built on top of, they found older basalt foundations. And their archaeology confirmed that those are the foundations of the very synagogue in which Jesus preached. The one where he drove out a demon. The one where he taught on the Sabbath. You can stand there and look at those foundation stones and think Jesus was here. But that's not even the most extraordinary discovery. About 25 meters away, two archaeologist priests found an octagonal church. They dug it out, and the description matched almost perfectly with what a 6th century pilgrim had written about visiting a church on that spot. So they kept digging, and found that the octagonal church had been built over a house church. That is a small space where Christians would meet before Christianity was legalized and proper churches could be built. And that house was built over domestic residence. In that house, they found graffiti, scratched into the walls in Greek, Aramaic, and Hebrew. The graffiti of early Christians, going back to the very beginning of the faith. Layer by layer, they traced the history of that place. The deepest layers had ordinary household objects, bowls, plates, that sort of thing, a family home. Then the household objects disappear, replaced by oil lamps. The house had become a meeting place, a church, and a Spanish pilgrim named Aguirre, who visited the Holy Land around the year 390, had written a description of visiting Peter's house, and it matched exactly what the Franciscans found almost 1,600 years later. This was Peter's house, the house where Jesus healed Peter's mother-in-law, where crowds gathered outside. And here's a detail that connects it all. This is the house where the roof was removed by the people who lowered their paralyzed friend through it so Jesus could heal him. Why does that matter? Because when the archaeologists examined the structure, they found that the walls were too thin to support a heavy roof. The roof would have had to be made of straw and mud, light enough to remove, just like the gospel says. So here are two places where we can locate Jesus and his activities as described in the Bible with absolute accuracy. The Holy Land does this over and over again. Archaeology confirms what Scripture describes. The pools of Bethesda, which some scholars thought were a metaphor, were excavated and found to look exactly as John described them. They're not just ancient ruins, they're actual places where the gospel happened. And when you go there, when you stand at that well in Nazareth, or touch the ground beneath the altar in Bethlehem, or look at those basalt foundation stones and Peter's house in Capernaum, Jesus stops being abstract. He stops being only words on a page. He becomes someone who stood somewhere, who drank water, who looked at rocks and thorny bushes and fertile soil and said, "Let me tell you a story about a farmer." And that, my friends, is the fifth gospel. I'll talk more about places where we can locate the real historical Jesus next week. Thank you for watching.